Hello YouTube. So originally I was going to do my follow-up video against the anarcho-capitalists in the form of a video essay format, but since it would make it too easy for them to strawman me, I decided to do it in more of a response format.
And welcome to episode 1 of Twitter Hot Takes, the show where I pick and choose different tweets that misrepresent, spread misinformation, or blatantly lie about a certain ideology, or my response to that said ideology. Today I'll be focusing on tweets that are anti-anarcho-capitalism from any perspective.
It's not a phase, Mom. Anarcho-capitalism is the future. I know it'll work because the non-aggression principle is human nature.
I see we've already arrived on the anarcho-capitalism is feudalism tweet. I know socialists don't understand political or philosophical ideology any more than a 6-year-old who was given a life supply of meth and alcohol. But seriously, can these people learn the difference between the two incredibly different systems that we're talking about here? Feudalism is a system where not only other people's land was taken by force against their will by the order of the feudal lord, which was usually backed by a state, where quote-unquote protection syndicates held people up against their will with weapons drawn and forced them to pay for the quote protection. And peasants were also restricted in terms of weapon ownership.
The peasants weren't the helpless pitchfork-wielding rabble-rousers history likes to make them out to be. In fact, they were all well-trained and well-versed in the use of the bow and arrow and kept it at their homes in case their kingdom was attacked. And there were in fact a multitude of peasant militia revolts because of this, that eventually forced these countries to get rid of the feudal system altogether. Just take a quick look at any medieval history channel and they would tell you that most serfs had a bow and arrow on them.
And fielding a knight was a much more costly and complicated endeavour, but a common peasant guy who you tell, look, every Sunday train with a bow. That's my new rule in my kingdom. Everyone on a Sunday practice with a bow. And when a war comes, hey, is anyone good with a bow? Great, I'll hire you as an archer.
Yeah, because it's not like we believe in this thing called natural law and natural rights, which makes slavery of any kind a violation of human rights.
Wait.
Who the hell is going to enforce the ban on slavery in an anarcho-capitalist society if there's no laws or government restricting it? Sure, you would say a mob of people would rise up and, lynch the slave owner, but wouldn't you rather have a society in which slavery is out and out banned beforehand so you don't have to fight a fucking war anytime a warlord starts enslaving people?
As self-ownership is a right, and by that logic we apparently believe in racism because we believe that all people are equal in rights, despite race. And greed, well, what is greed? Pursuing your self-interest, which has given people things like cars, rockets, and computers and smartphones? In that case, greed is pretty neat. Simple. Currency in an anarcho-capitalist society is anything mutually agreed upon by any amount of individuals making a transaction. Or you could have companies like Bitcoin and Litecoin creating currencies that have value based on the supply and demand curve.
Currency speculation, like what you're suggesting, spells disaster for any economy it's implemented in, and leads to massive inflation, wealth drain, and more and more people are simply going to make money off the trading off the currency itself, rather than actually producing anything of equal value themselves. Like what they're doing with Bitcoin right now. This was known as the Bretton Woods monetary system, and is the main reason Tricky Dick Nixon moved us off the gold standard in the first place. To protect our currency from the speculators, so as to try to curb what was essentially theft of our private wealth by foreign interests and countries.
The third indispensable element in building the new prosperity is closely related to creating new jobs and halting inflation. We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In the past 7 years, there's been an average of one international monetary crisis every year. Now, who gains from these crises? Not the working man, not the investor, not the real producers of wealth. The gainers are the international money speculators. Because they thrive on crises, they help to create them. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Now, what does this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar.
So no, Bitcoin is not based on the supply and demand curve, and it has a fixed exchange rate, and that is why it sucks.
Newsflash. Since private companies don't have an illegitimate monopoly on force and coercion, and so cannot coerce or force people into things like that, they can only survive off making a living through profit. Private tyrannies don't exist, and they can never exist.
The British East India Company was a private corporation that used its private army to invade and enslave groups of people for their own profit. And if you think the Maratha Confederacy fight off a private army that was twice the manpower of the entirety of the British Imperial Army is ridiculous. Well, there was a mutiny of 1858 that ultimately ended corporate rule in India. But that was after decades of exploitation at the hands of what began as just one simple trading company that was just given way too much freedom.
Now we're gonna do to you physically what you've been doing to us financially for years.
Never underestimate the strength of a coal mining man, Lieutenant.
But they never teach you this in high school. And since you're still young, I'll cut you some slack. And I know you're not trying to deliberately mislead people. I just thought I'd share that inconvenient example of a historical, private tyranny.
Sure, they can violate it or follow it, but the NAP is not arbitrary, logic is not arbitrary, and rights are not arbitrary.
And yet, what makes you so sure that the NAP is part of human nature? Since you are only about 14, I doubt you know much about the truth of human nature or how people actually work. If you want to know how people actually work, take a psychology class as soon as possible. You're going to learn a lot. Well, that's all I have to say. My advice, kiddo, stay in school. And eat your goddamn broccoli, otherwise you don't get a red pill. But hey, I would also like to go into detail about how most modern democracies aren't mob rule, but I'm going to end it here since that's a topic for another video of mine. I'm conservative, not a leftist. Don't get that wrong. Keep calm and remove kebab, my peeps.